The MLS season concluded with a former New York City champion igniting a social media frenzy with his slick game-winning assist in the final. And one of the most respected writers in our game who was there, he's going to come and share some of the stories about his experience on the latest NYCFC Views.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast. NYCFC Views.
Collins approaches the shot, and New York City wins the first MLS Cup on their first try, and they're going crazy. Tiene tiro y gol! Gol! New York City es el campeón de Major League Soccer!
The sickest New York City FC podcast. It's gonna be sick.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Glenn Crooks. Quick update on Roberto Abramowitz, my co-host, who underwent quadruple bypass surgery now 3 weeks ago. His exact words, feeling better and stronger than last week. He's getting his appetite back. That's been difficult for him, but he looks better, sounds better, and feels better. And I know he appreciates all the outreach. Well, I know we watched this one. Columbus Crew winning their match on Saturday night against LAFC, the defending MLS Cup champions, in the final. And the thing I would say at the top here about this game is that statistics, in particular of late, possession statistics, don't always tell the tale. But in this case, they very much did. Columbus had 62% of the ball, but it's what they did in possession that really stood out. And you hear the words possession with a purpose, and that was personified by Crew SC. All right, time to welcome in a guy who he knows how to share his story. Been reading him for years. He's one of our top writers here on the American Game. You can read most of his material on MLSsoccer.com. He was at lower.com stadium for this match and also for the build-up to it as well. Let's say hello to Charles Boehm. Charles, what's happening? Hey, man.
Very, very glad to be here with you, Glenn.
Well, thank you so much. And even as of today, it's Tuesday, and more things are coming out around MLS and around this game. And I haven't had a chance to read it, but I know you just published late on Monday, and it was entitled "It Takes a Village," talking about Crew SC. So it really is sort of a wonderful, I don't want to call it a fairy tale, that's too trite, but it has that kind of feel, doesn't it?
It does, and it's for more than one context. You know, you have a team that all season and in the first year of their head coach's tenure, sort of thumb their nose at all the sort of conventions that MLS has sort of been dominated by in terms of tactics and game models over the last few years. They want the ball, and they want to beat you with the ball. They don't care if they concede goals every once in a while as a result. Wilfried Nancy, I find one of the most fascinating head coaches in the league right now and beyond, for that matter. And I have a feeling he will be beyond this league before too long. And to do everything that he did and his team achieved in this tournament, in this final, in these playoffs, in the season, for a club and a city that has been through what the Columbus Crew community has been through. It was just 5 years ago that they saved their team from relocation to Austin, and now they've won their second trophy in that time. And it's when you go there, and I recommend it anyone who enjoys soccer in this country or this continent, go catch a game in Columbus if you can, because the relationship between the club and the fans there, I'd say, is special because of what they've gone through and achieved together.
And it's a cool city, you know. It's got more than I think people outside of Columbus gives it credit to. You were there. Whoa! I just pulled up my mic, but you were there several days before the game for the buildup of all this. And you know, when you go out on the town, you know, it's pretty artsy, right?
It is, and it's the fastest growing metropolitan area in the Midwest. I think this is part of the backstory of Save the Crew and the revitalization of the club under new ownership that gets lost easily if you're not in the city. but this was once the quintessential small market MLS team. Their supporters decades ago coined the catchphrase "massive" as sort of a self-deprecating tagline to underline, just how not massive they were compared to New York and LA and Chicago and the bigger markets around the league. And now they've gained 500,000 people in population since the turn of the century. It's a thriving economy in addition to being a state capital and a college town. And the Crew are now, I'd say, closer to the heart of the Columbus identity than they ever have been, because there's just so much pride in what they've achieved on and off the field.
And then there's this guy, Wilfred Nancy, who really grew up as a coach in Montreal, academy system, first team assistant, and then getting the job as the head coach when Thierry Henry left, in the middle of the night, before the season started. And it's really, there are so many fascinating tales to this. Joey Saputo, I mean, it's pretty well known that, he's got that Jerry Jones sort of ownership personality. And indeed, it's quite possible he just chased Wilfred out of town because of that incident in the summer when he came in the locker room after a game and gave players a hard time loudly, which is totally against the way he wants to do things. Because this is what I'm so impressed with him, is that you hear coaches talk about it's okay to make a mistake. You're going to build off of that. You're going to develop from failing. He abides by that, doesn't he?
I mean, he takes it to 11. It's some of the things he says in front of the microphone, before and after games are particularly striking to me, because these are the things that coaches, sort of the hard knocks of the sport, sort of teach coaches not to do this, right? I mean, even his predecessor in Columbus, Caleb Porter, who won an NCAA national championship at Akron with what they was called at the time the death by 1,000 passes approach, right? They love to have the ball. They love to keep the ball and ping it around. And a few years into his professional coaching tenure, his teams played significantly differently. They were a lot more pragmatic. And I think the conventional wisdom was that this is what MLS and the professional level in general will do to ideologues. And so for Nancy to go to step up onto the dais after a playoff series win over Atlanta, I believe it was, or some point during that Atlanta series, and he said, "I tell my players the scoreboard doesn't matter. What matters is that we stick to our process and we do what we've planned to do, and that we do what we need to do with the ball as part of our model." I mean, that's again it would be so easy, right, to crush that as sort of pitiful naivete, and here they are now. They've hosted a trophy and they did not compromise.
And this is either going to be a book or the title of the documentary. I've already written Columbus and said I'd like the rights to the book. I would like to write the book and call it "Impossible is an Opinion." Those were his words to, I think he first uttered it on Apple TV in his postgame with Katie Witham. And then in subsequent interviews, I think he repeated it a couple of times. I know SiriusXM FC, they've run a clip where he told Brian Dunseth the same thing. But again, that's what he said to the team. Was that prior to MLS Cup, or was that when he joined the forces of Crew SC? Is that what he said at the beginning?
I hadn't heard it before
I hadn't either.
Katie Witham interview, although I suspect that he's probably uttered it more than once in the locker room and in behind the scenes. But it is very much of a keeping with everything he said all year, and even going back to his time in Montreal. I mean, I would remind listeners that when Thierry Henry left Montreal, and this was considered, Henry was considered a big get for the club, which is sort of stuck up there in Quebec in its own sort of little niche that doesn't always get the big MLS spotlight because of being in Canada, because of the club being in a francophone speaking region and being one of the smaller spenders in more recent years in MLS. But they have an interesting culture and thing that they do up there. And it was perceived as a lack of ambition when Nancy was promoted from an assistant's post to replace Henry. Henry had to go back to Europe because of the pandemic and being separated. Not only was he away from his family over in Europe, but the Canadian teams had to be based in the U.S. For months at a time during the pandemic.
Right.
So there was all these factors that led to Henry having to call time, and no one had heard of this Nancy guy, right, when he was promoted, and then he took the CFM to their best MLS season ever last year, and took them on a deep playoff run that only a very, let's say, pragmatic performance from NYCFC was able to disrupt that run. And then Tim Bezbatchenko, the president at Columbus, who had previously led Toronto FC to great success, is now, I think you have to officially give him his flowers as one of the top executives in MLS, if not the one. Saw enough in what Nancy did to pay a significant amount. I believe it was low seven figures to get Nancy out of the last year of his contract in Montreal. Wow. And I think based on everything you spoke about with Joey Saputo before, when I got to sit down with Nancy during preseason, and I was consider myself very fortunate in retrospect to have gotten 30 or 40 minutes one-on-one with him at a hotel in Fort Lauderdale back in February. He said, I knew I was going to have to leave eventually, right? And I think the clear message was, it's better to leave on your own terms and in the place and time of your own choosing than to have to deal with a dismissal. And so there was enough there that, the crew invested in this guy. And I think it was not just what he could do with the first team, but also creating something club wide. And we see this now, the crew, a big part of what fueled this run to the MLS Cup was having the best operated second team in the league, with reaching the MLS Next Pro final this year, winning the championship of MLS Next Pro last year, promoting, depending on how you look at it, 3 to 4 starters or regulars from the second team to the first team squad for this year. And I think they're doing some really interesting things at the academy level as well. So
well, if I could interrupt, I've had an extensive conversation with Laurent Courtois, who is their coach, another French-speaking guy, and he number one, something that stood out was that he thought the New York City FC 2 team should have been named the team of the year because they do what you're supposed to do, utilize the 15 and 16-year-olds, give them experience, and not concerned necessarily with results. And he takes the same sort of tact. I remember asking him about defending the championship because I spoke to him about mid-season this year, and he said, well, I don't even think about that. And again, another guy, somebody could just say that and you go, yeah, sure. But true to form, and seeing how some of his players from 2022 contributed in 23, there's definitely a good thing going there. Tim Bezbatchenko right now is the executive. He's got to be considered the top guy. And it's not just the first team. As you said, it's from top to bottom. So, and I know a number of coaches in Montreal, Charles, so they all knew who Nancy was. Many of us maybe didn't have much familiarity. And Montreal couldn't lose this game. Marc Dos Santos, he's got he's from Montreal, and he and Nancy are very close, and he's an assistant for LAFC. And but he got the short end of it this time. I saw they had an extended hug after the game. I'm not sure what Mark said to him, but I'm sure it was complimentary.
Yeah, and there's real Canadian and Francophone fingerprints on both sides. I mean, it's interesting that I don't think LAFC reached this final without some really excellent work on set pieces. And Dos Santos got his flowers from Ryan Hollingshead, I think it was a few games ago, talking about the intense level of detail and preparation they get from Dos Santos, and who was a big part in their goalkeeper Max Crepeau demanding a trade out of Vancouver and going to LAFC, which was also a big ingredient in their success. And to throw just one more on there, or two more, I guess Issa Tall, the assistant GM, is a very respected guy who I think is probably going to move on and run his own team sooner than later from the crew. And then Yohan Dame is another very respected Frenchman who was in Cincinnati for a while, was the interim head coach there a couple of times, and is on Nancy's staff now, and I expect will continue to climb in the game and in the league.
Two players I want to focus on. One's a former New York City player, but first, Darlington Nagbe. And you tweeted a story that you had published, I think a couple of years ago, or maybe a year ago. I can't quite remember.
2 years, yeah.
And and in essence, it was you talked about things that I have wondered all along. Number one, how he's not been a part of our U.S. men's national team squad. I don't understand. I just don't. I'm sure there's there must be some reasons in there, and maybe you can shed some light on that. But here's Giorgio Chiellini, who announced his retirement today, by the way, the LAFC central back, the Italian legend, talking about Darlington Nagbe after the game. And Shane, if you could put up the quote, so if you are watching this, you can read along. Chiellini about Nagbe: "I've never faced him, but he is an example for everyone and every player that he's played with. Watching the games of Columbus, you can understand how important he is as a player and as a good leader. He has good value, and he brings you value. He is a hard worker, very generous, and helps all the teammates close to him to play better." I mean, what better midfielder is there in MLS? And you might even say in the United States of America. And so shed some light on this, Charles. Why the heck has he not been controlling and patrolling the midfield for the U.S. men?
It is one of the most intriguing, I think, personal stories of my life in the game, writing about this game on a full-time basis. And there's a little bit of, I'm not comparing him as a player necessarily, but the sort of offbeat personality and unique skill set he has. I occasionally find myself thinking of Juan Roman Riquelme, who, sort of your favorite player's favorite player, right? A cult hero for Argentina and for Boca Juniors, who somehow never really reached the heights maybe that his talent would seem to have given him the possibility to, in terms of where he played and the numbers he racked up in Europe. And Nagbe's never been to Europe, but he's one guy who everyone who's played with him or against him will tell you this is a rare, special player. I think he's probably, I can easily say, the most press-resistant midfielder that I've ever seen, and probably MLS has ever seen. His technical ability, his IQ, they're all off the charts. But his own personal story is that this is a guy whose dad was a professional player, a Liberian international, who had to leave Liberia and emigrate to the U.S. And the kid in his family, Darlington, and his family grew up in the Cleveland, Ohio suburbs. And he's a private guy. He doesn't really open up in interviews very often. He can do a media availability without really saying too much of note. But at the few occasions that he's spoken freely, he's done some podcasts with fellow players or former players and that sort of thing. And this is someone who values family life a lot, and he's got several kids, and he values very much being at home with them every night, and doesn't want to be away for long periods the way that his dad had to be away from him in his childhood. And so that's kind of always informed his professional decisions. He's moved from Portland to Atlanta, and then from Atlanta on to Columbus. He's won MLS Cups in all three clubs. And Ohio is home for him, and he doesn't feel the need to prove himself or to prove anything to anyone else by going and playing in the biggest league he can. He simply has chosen MLS and chosen daily excellence, and doesn't want to be anywhere else but Columbus, and is going to be there for the long term, and doesn't need to be the highest paid player on the team. I believe he's right now a designated player, but his salary can be bought down if they decide to go get another big signing. And the way he plays too is incredible, because for so much of his early career in MLS, coaches and everyone around him were sort of trying to coax him into this attacking juggernaut, because his technical ability clearly seemed to be at that level to be an elite attacker. But really where he's found his zone is just running the midfield. He doesn't need to be the guy racking up numbers or playing the final pass. He is just the most ball secure, game regulating type of player that exists in this league, I would say.
Yeah, somebody put not a heat map, but one of those maps that show the direction of the passes, the distance of the passes. And it's incredible. There's arrows in every direction, and every one of those passes, I think with the exception of two, but then you have some incredible, I don't know if it was 92 out of 94. I don't have it in front of me, but the fact that his passes are multi-directional. But are you suggesting then that it's more his decision maybe not to accept an invitation to the national team versus Greg Berhalter or his predecessors not wanting to include him? I do remember a story once where he turned down an invitation because something was happening, but so that wasn't an isolated incident. That's really him.
Yeah, he has turned down multiple call-ups. I believe he's up to 25 caps for his career thereabouts. He was on the field for the Cuba disaster, the 2-1 loss to Trinidad and Tobago on the last day of 2018 World Cup qualifying. That was such a catastrophic epochal event in the history of the game here, right? And to some extent, for some people, that will always be a mar on his resume, a blemish. But I think he's told some of these stories again in one-off settings that he didn't feel entirely comfortable or wasn't entirely fulfilled by all the things that national team players have to do. You add mileage to your body and days and nights away from home to represent your country in far off places, sometimes in difficult places, in obscure, out of the way CONCACAF places. He told a story about having to brush his teeth with bottled water in St. Vincent for World Cup qualifying there, where it just didn't necessarily feel like, I think, something that he felt intrinsically driven to do, which is, again, that's so different, right? The average professional player is just hardwired to crave and lust after a place with the national team. It's a patriotic experience, but it's also a sort of a box you're supposed to check if you're an elite player. And I just don't think he has that sense of drive on the same level as most guys, which makes him all the more interesting to me, even if it's infuriating to a typical national team fan.
It is. Yeah, no, absolutely. And Jimmy Conrad, he tweeted out, he put Nagbe on his MLS Mount Rushmore, which, he's of high regard. He also won an NCAA championship at Akron to add to his trophy case. So that's Darlington Nagbe. Now, Malde Amundsen. So this is, quite a story for New York City fans. You're hearing the normal, and you're seeing it on social media. We let him go, that sort of thing. But for whatever reason, it's worked out better for him in Columbus. Although with New York City FC, he had his first year, 2021. They won the MLS Cup. He played in 32 games, started 14 of them, a goal and 3 assists. He played in the maybe the most important stages of MLS Cup at Portland, the final, when he came on as a substitute in stoppage time. So the pass he made, for the second goal was a thing of beauty. And I saw it. I put something out right away because my thought was, I am begging for players out of the midfield to see passes like that more frequently, or for teams to set themselves up off the ball so those passes can be made, baiting the defender. And it seemed like it was all set up. It was something that they had talked about, maybe had even worked on together, him and Yeboah. And what can you say about Malde Amundsen?
Yeah, and it's fascinating on so many levels. One, this is the essence of success in MLS. And the crew should show that. Yes, they went out and splashed out on Cucho Hernandez. They splashed out to bring Diego Rossi back to MLS from Turkey. They've made significant investments in off-field infrastructure. Money does matter in MLS, but true success hinges on your ability to identify value elsewhere in the league and to maximize the assets that you inherit on your roster. And there's so many examples of that. I mean, Amundsen was, I imagine, for NYCFC when they felt they had needs elsewhere in the squad. The crew were in a position where they had a catastrophic injury to Will Sands, who was one of their left-sided defenders, who I believe,
ironically, a New York City FC Academy product.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. And they traded away John Mensah, their club captain, the center back, and a real leader to the Earthquakes. So they were short in the back, and they were really willing to part with a set of assets that NYCFC probably felt they could better apply elsewhere on their squad. So it's obviously it's probably tough for people like me to look at these kind of deals in hindsight and question, but you can say that about Minnesota United trading away Christian Ramirez, who ends up becoming an MLS Cup champion, and other examples around the squad. So that was, I think, good management on the part of the crew, and also a player like Amundsen really seizing his opportunity in a system that I think incentivizes players to be brave, and Nazi loves that word. He loves to talk about bravery and courage. And in the eyes of another coach, I think that game-winning assist by Amundsen could easily be branded a Hollywood pass and a waste of possession, effectively a turnover. Right? You're trying to split the center back and the right back for the opposition with a 60-yard through ball that in 8 out of 10 situations maybe rolls out for a goal kick or a goalkeeper's easy take. But in that moment, and there's some smart people on Twitter went back and found other examples of him trying to play that pass. There's clearly a pattern of play that they're rehearsing there. And in general, I think, we don't, this is a generalization, but in the United States, a 3-4-2-1 formation is not necessarily a default. It's not something you see a lot of teams try to play. But a lot of the, possession gurus around the world will point to that system as right up there with the Dutch 4-3-3 as the type, as a position, as a shape that gives you these opportunities for relationships, triangles, combinations. And the Crew are not just passing the ball around their center backs and their back three to dominate the possession stats the way they always do. They are circulating to all 10 field players. They're looking for seams. They're probing. They're trying to pull opposing defenses out of position. And there you saw, Hollingshead has been one of the best weapons for LAFC in these playoffs, but he was exploited and clearly targeted. And Jeff Ruder over at The Athletic did a great at-length breakdown after the game of what the Crew did. But they took a strength of LAFC's and turned it into a weakness by creating those different combinations and pulling apart Hollingshead from his center backs and isolating him out there on an island with his winger Oliveira tasked with doing a lot of pressing further up the pitch.
Yeah, Jeff's article really points it out clearly. John Rojas, one of my friends and colleagues who actually was my co-commentator on the MLS Cup at Portland in 2021, the New York City FC network. He wanted to make sure, he said, everybody's focusing on the Amundsen pass, but look at what happened before that. And it's true that it was a magical goal done in what you would have to say, at least in 2023, the Columbus way. Now so that's for MLS Cup. Let's pause there. Don Garber gave his State of the League address. You were there for that. Anything that stuck out to you from that? When you were listening, did you go like, oh, huh?
Yeah, so we were all eager, I think, to see what tidbits he might share about the overall state of roster investment. Ever since Messi's arrival in MLS, there's been a kind of a litany of CSOs and decision makers and executives basically predicting more, I think, openly on the record than I'm used to hearing, that there would be significant changes to roster regulations this winter, that there was a real sense of opportunity, that the hype and the tension that Messi generated could sort of finally coax at least a critical mass or voting majority over the line to open up the purse strings and maybe be a little bit more aggressive. And remember, now we're less than 3 years away from World Cup 2026, which everyone has for years been pointing to as this watershed moment and this opportunity. And so we got confirmation that there will not be a fourth designated player slot, right? Which there's a CBA element to all this too, right? The players union has to sign off on significant aspects of the way things are structured. But in general, the league also has a lot of power to change this unilaterally, right? I mean, the norm has always been that there's a significant number of owners that are holding back the purse strings for competitive reasons, for financial reasons, and a combination thereof. So we didn't get necessarily the money quote from Garber about spending more on players, but there was a lot of talk about schedules, and I thought he, sometimes he's speaking off the cuff, and sometimes he's dropping Easter eggs for us that turn out to have been notable, often in retrospect. And right now we have a metaphor I've used constantly here. MLS is facing a situation with a queen-sized blanket on a king-sized bed, right? They want to have a Leagues Cup. They want to have this month-long tournament with Liga MX in the middle of the season. They want to keep to a 34-game regular season with as few midweek games as possible, because midweek games always draw less at the gate and are less popular among the fans who actually pack the stadium. And remember, stadium revenues are still the key revenue driver for the league. But then they also want to, you want to have a proper preseason. You want to have a proper playoff format. They just expanded the playoffs to give Apple more inventory for playoff games, which are the most desirable properties.
He made it pretty clear that the playoff format is not going to change. Did he not?
Yes, well, or he's not ready to,
or he's going to add more games.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. And to some extent, I am sympathetic to Garber and the board and the league executives who make these decisions, because they get killed for years for playing through international breaks, and then they carve out the November international break in the middle of the postseason to make sure that their top players and top talents are not missing playoff games while on national team duty, and they get killed for that too, right? Because it's a big interruption to the momentum that's generated in the early rounds of the playoffs. So there's a little bit of a rock and a hard place situation here. But he said, they don't think they can afford to shut down the league for more than maybe a few days, or maybe I imagine they'll reduce some of the fixtures during the Copa America on U.S. soil this summer. Yeah. They can't shut down. They may be able to shut down. I mean, in the past, they've gone dark for the group stage of the World Cup, which is right in the middle of the season. But
that brings us to what's going to happen in 2026. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but one reporter questioned the commissioner as to whether they might go to an international schedule format, and I wasn't clear if they meant just for that season or permanently.
And I believe it was Garber brought up in that context, the Liga MX Apertura Clausura structure, which is effectively you have 2 seasons in a year. That sort of create 2 natural pauses rather than just one. And I was struck that Garber, I think he was the one who used that specific language unprompted, Clausura Apertura. So that was interesting. And then he also sort of mused that possibly some kind of off-site event in warm weather locales would be needed to get the games in, because right now they're starting in February. I don't know how much further into winter you can start your season when, as it is now, Montreal and Toronto are starting the season for a month or more on the road, right? Or Montreal have to go play on bad turf in the enormous Stade Olympique to get home games before April, because the pitch is frozen until then. Meanwhile, you have 100 plus degree temperatures on a daily basis, or suffocating heat and humidity in the middle of the season in midsummer in the Texas cities, in Florida, and a lot of other places. So you have extreme heat on one side and extreme cold on the other. And how do you fit the games in, right? I mean, Toronto wants to play in the summer. A lot of the other cities want to play in spring and fall. So I could see there being some kind of shift. And I don't know whether they're going to, draw a line and make a big change, or if we're going to see more of a gradual evolution to just sort of open up the season and let teams customize their fixture balance the way they want.
All right, Charles. He's Charles Boehm, MLSsoccer.com, longtime writer on the U.S. game. And I suppose before I let you go, since we have you here, today there were 2 positions filled in MLS. One, a former New York City guy, Jason Kreis. He's going back to RSL, Real Salt Lake, where he played and coached, won an MLS Cup as a coach. He was the first-year coach for New York City, and then was sacked after 1 year. He's the director of operations and special projects. It appeared that he was assured to be the top assistant under Phil Neville in Portland. In fact, I heard, there were people there in high positions that were saying, he's coming. So something happened between 2 weeks ago and now.
Yeah, I can actually report that I've got probably any moment now here at some point this afternoon. I've got a one-on-one with Jason that's going to be dropping soon to talk more about his RSL homecoming, and that was his choice of words. Had a really interesting chat with Jason yesterday. This is a new position. He's going to report directly to club president John Kimball, and it's going to be a mix of on and off field responsibilities. Everything from helping streamline and speed up the immigration process by which players and staff get green cards and are moving towards citizenship, and helping with roster designations in the long run, to helping their academy produce more first team players and elevate more elite talent, because that's an academy centered club that has not necessarily had enough kids moving into the first team over the last couple of years. He's going to be a resource for Pablo Mastroeni, who I think, whether he liked it or not, Mastroeni is being assigned a new technical staff with more experience this winter. And then he's going to be working on learning the business side of things, because, and this is interesting, I think, for NYCFC fans, Christ feels that his experiences at NYCFC and in Orlando drove home for him the importance of having a coaching staff and a front office and CSO staff and a decision-making structure at a club that is fully aligned. And he did not feel that he had that at NYCFC nor at Orlando, with different changes in the executive level before and during his arrival in those places. And so I think that's a big factor in why he's taking this job. And he's no longer going to be, at least for now, he's not going to be on the coaching carousel. Although he wouldn't explicitly confirm, but it definitely does seem correct what you say, that he was very likely headed to Portland, or at least had an opportunity there. But for him, Utah became home for him and his family while he was at RSL, and this is where they wanted to be. And so now he's back there at Salt Lake.
I've talked to him enough to know how much he missed that area of the country. There's little question of that. And if it comes up or you think of it, just let him know you came on with me. And say hi as I prepare to text my congratulations, because I know it's great for his family. Dean Smith. So globally, we think of him as the guy who got Aston Villa promoted in 2019 to the Premier League, and now he's the head coach of Charlotte FC.
Yes, and who were clearly looking globally in their search. Frank Lampard was also one of the leading names attached to this vacancy. I think they made a good choice here, although the lingering question remains whether Charlotte they certainly have international experience, right? And their technical staff, executives have rich experience of the European game. Do they have enough MLS know-how to be able to apply the expertise of someone like Smith to the specific and often peculiar MLS context? So I think that question remains to be seen. He will need to have people around him who can help him navigate the quirks of this league. But when you talk about someone who can command respect in a locker room, someone who can help with recruitment of international players and help put your club on the map, I think it makes a lot of sense in that regard. And having coached at multiple levels on the pyramid, I think he'll probably arrive here knowing that he's getting into a different sort of ball game.
A lot of New York City folks around that story. Christian Latancio, he was let go in favor now of Dean Smith. And you mentioned Frank Lampard, who got his MLS playing career going in a New York City FC uniform. Well, Charles, good luck with the story. We will look out for it. So the story on Jason Christ with Charles Boehm, MLSsoccer.com. Thanks so much for hopping on and sharing some of your experiences. It was wonderful. Thanks, Charles.
Always a pleasure, Glenn.
So this is a week where there was some celebration for New York City FC, in as much as on Monday, it was the second anniversary of New York City winning MLS Cup just a couple of years ago. And there's the celebration after the penalty. You see Chenot. There's Malde Amundsen, now the winner of 2 MLS Cups. Maxi Morales, who'll come back from a knee injury. Tylus Magno, James Sands, Alfredo Morales, who was so vital for New York City. He recently got his B coaching license, I noticed, LinkedIn. Ismail Tajuri Shradi, who is a free agent right now. And there's Tati Castellanos, who scored the goal that game to give New York City the 1-0 win, converted his penalty. And Alexander Collins is not in the picture because he's the one that scored the goal. But then this, I have to give credit, kudos to, and I think, Shane, do I have this one? This is the Trey Fillmore from Blue Balls Pod, and he put out this thing. I was just going through some things this week. Apparently we don't have it. Do you? No? Okay. I forgot to send it to him. So Shane, I know we have to cut like this. Just edit this part out right here. Just if you could tag it and edit this part, I'll go right from that picture, and then we're going to go right into kicking it around. All right, let's go kicking it around. I'm pretty excited that I have a future interview. The date is not set, but the commitment is there. Mark Geiger, who is the chief of referees for pro referees, and that is for Major League Soccer. He took over for Howard Webb. When Mark, he's a two-time MLS Referee of the Year. He was the first American to referee in the World Cup. And I bring this up because one of the topics is going to be referee dissent that I have with Mark. And I was tuned into the U.S. Soccer Board of Directors meeting recently. It was an open meeting, and the topic of referees came up, and the topic of protecting referees was paramount on the minds of the board and how they're going to work on things. And it's certainly a discussion point. And it's the one thing that happened in Turkey recently, and let's show the picture of the referee Halil Umut Meler. You see the black eye, the black left eye. Well, he suffered a punch from the president of the club that lost the match. There you see the punch, the follow through, and you see the referee Meler, Faruk Koca, who ironically was the Turkish Superliga Fair Play Award, or his team did a year ago, 2022. But on this occasion, Ankaragucu, who lost the match, and that was just it's a crazy scene. It's one that is shocking, yet it really emphasizes the point that referees do need more protection. No question about it. One other thing I wanted to mention here on Kicking It Around was $1 Billion Goal. It's a docu-series. It's in 3 parts, I think. I watched it all last night. I can't remember if it was 3 or 4 parts. But it's produced by CBS Sports Golazo, and the producer is the late Grant Wall. And it's somewhat surreal, but certainly puts a smile on your face as Grant is pictured narrating a good portion of this. $1 Billion Goal is Paul Caragieri's goal that beat Trinidad in 1989 to push the Americans through to the World Cup in 1990, their first appearance in the World Cup in 50 years, and how that goal helped ignite everything that we see today. And we can say from an MLS standpoint, 29 teams, a 30th joining next year in San Diego, and the beat goes on. But it's a really, really well-done docu-series. People like Tony Meola, who was on that team. There's so many to just tell the stories of what they went through. Tab Ramos, and really interesting. And if you're a soccer fan and you're not familiar, or maybe you are somewhat familiar with the story of that team, please give it a view. It's on Paramount Plus. Obviously, that's a subscription service, but maybe there's some way that if you don't have a subscription, go find somebody that does, and maybe head over to their house or apartment and check it out. It's called $1 Billion Goal. Well, that's going to do it for me. Thank you so much to Charles Boehm, MLSsoccer.com, who covered MLS Cup, and we reviewed a lot of great things. And feel well, get better. Roberto Abramowitz, I'll give you the report each week until he's back here co-hosting with me, Glenn Crooks, on NYCFC Views.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast NYCFC Views on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.